What was the worst job interview you've had? I had an interview where I knew the answers I gave were good, solid examples. I understood the technical side well, but the interviewer kept sneering, being rude, and saying, "Really?" in a skeptical tone, and I got the distinct impression he hated me. About 20 minutes in, I thought about politely calling it a day and leaving, but in my innocence, thought it would be good patience to stay. 40 minutes in, it's like a light switch goes off and he's the nicest guy. His eyes light up and he started hard selling the role and position to me. He introduces me to the team. The director interviews me and he and the team are lovely. Apparently, their interview technique is to be rude to see how you perform under pressure, and they'd all been observing using a camera and were impressed I remained so polite and calm throughout. They couldn't understand why I declined. Edit. To save me responding to comments, I understand pressure testing is a legitimate technique, and whilst I felt deeply uncomfortable and my gut was screaming at me to get out of there like in a nightclub when you know the creepy guy is really bad news and you need to get out, I understood that it was a possibility that was what he could have been doing. However, to add more context, they had my work history, including 10 years in the ambulance services, which involves resuscitation whilst the public yell at you and threaten you. I'm used to being polite and professional whilst being harassed and threatened. Nothing spreadsheet-based. Even pulling all-nighters is going to match that for pressure, and I'm well known for staying calm and composed all the time, even if I'm exploding inside. My biggest objection was not realizing I was being broadcast and hearing them discuss my reactions to my face, like I was some kind of movie actor. It felt so violating. Story 2. Yeah, I have one that sticks out. I applied to a government branch as a network admin. The newspaper ad asked for a bachelor's degree. They called me into the interview. When I got there, the first thing the interviewer said was, "We wanted someone with a master's degree. Why'd you apply?" Now, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had other interviews that day and got them mixed up. Crap happens. I just informed the interviewer that the ad I applied for requested a bachelor's degree and confirmed the position I was interviewing for. No, we definitely wanted someone with a master's degree. So again, why did you apply? If you wanted someone with a master's degree, why did you bother calling me in for an interview? You're very rude and unprofessional. Yeah, you effed up at every junction thus far, but I'm the one who's rude and unprofessional. Story 3. I went into a family-owned custom furniture shop that had several openings in the carpentry department. Red flag number 1. When I arrived, I spoke to the person at the front of house stating I was there for an interview. The conversation went as follows. Note, owner's office was directly behind the front desk. He was watching us through a two-way mirror. Me to the front desk clerk. "Hi, I'm here to interview for the carpenter position. I saw your post online." Owner storms out of his office, points finger at me, face full of anger. Red flag number 2. Owner, "Are you experienced?" Me, "Yes, I have 7 years experience with carpentry, but I'm new to furniture." Owner, "Are you experienced?" Red flag number 3. Me, "Yes." Owner, "Fine, I'll get the lead carpenter and he'll talk to you." At this point, I should have noped the F out of there, but I had been unemployed for some time and my savings was running on fumes, so I assumed he may have just been in a bad mood that day, so I had waited for the lead carpenter. Lead carpenter comes out and we have the interview on the sales floor. Interview goes as normal until he asks about my experience. Carpenter, "So tell me how you have experience with woodwork but not with furniture." Me, "I build musical instruments. I'm familiar with all power tools and measurements required." Carpenter looks at me like I have 2 heads while I explain this, but the rest of the interview proceeds as normal. He stated he'd start me off at 10 an hour, probational hire for 2 weeks to see how I fit. Part of the interview comes where he asked if I had any questions. Me, "So is the owner having a bad day?" Carpenter, "No, that's how he is." Red flag number 4. We have an awkward silence staring at each other for about 10 seconds. Then, without saying anything, I just walk out. Found out a few weeks later from a friend who's a woodworker that place is known amongst furniture woodworkers as the place you want to avoid, and he mentioned that a few days before I interviewed that their entire carpentry staff, minus the lead carpenter, about 8 people, walked out. I now live about a mile from that store and pass it on my daily commute. Every 5 to 6 months, they put up a "now hiring all positions" sign up front. Can't imagine how many people they've cycled through at this point. To answer a few questions, the carpentry shop is in South Florida. Apparently, they stay in business because they do amazing work. Two-way mirror, also known as two-way glass. A two-way mirror is glass that's reflective on one side and clear on the other, giving the appearance of a mirror to those who see the reflection, but allowing people on the clear side to see through, as if at a window. The name is misleading, but that's what it's called. This was 4 years ago now, so $10 an hour was way too low for the verbal abuse and labor. In my early 20s, I built guitars, ukuleles, and occasionally violins. I've since changed vocations, but still repair them from time to time. So, just a quick aside, something very underrated that I think a lot of people overlook when they apply for a new job is like, what's the turnover rate like? If every 5 to 6 months, every position is like up for hire, that is a massive, massive red flag. So, kind of hearing how the sausage is made, so to speak, behind the scenes at this place, not surprising to hear that they have such high turnover. Story 4. As the interviewee, I told them I hated salespeople when they asked why I'd left my last job, which exposed 2 things about me. I hadn't looked up the company I was interviewing with, and that their primary line of business was sales. The mood got chilly real fast after that. Did not get the job. As the interviewer, had a guy ask if it was okay if he went to the restroom real fast and then never came back. His recruiter, who had come with him, was super embarrassed by the whole thing. Honestly, he was a young kid who just graduated, and while he was getting some of the more in-depth technical questions wrong, he definitely was asking the right questions in return, so we probably would have brought him on entry level. I think he was experiencing a case of imposter syndrome, since we were asking him things he didn't know, so he panicked. Hope he received some coaching on how to handle that. Story 5. Background. My face tends to get really red when I'm stressed/embarrassed. In a previous job, my company hired a consultant to help some of us improve our presentation skills. Consultant gave me some good advice. One of the weirder pieces of advice, however, was that if my face got red, I should flex my calf muscles because the flexing would divert blood away from my face and to my legs. I had no idea if that was true or not, but it was weird enough that I remembered it. Job interview. About 10 years later, I'm giving a presentation at a job interview. I'm a scientist, and giving my research presentation as part of a job interview is pretty common. My research was pretty good, but it had one critical flaw that I wanted to avoid discussing during my presentation. Somehow, everyone in the room locked in on the flaw and directed a barrage of critical questions at me. I could feel my face starting to get red, and all I could do was furiously flex my effing calf muscles, which didn't do a damn thing. I didn't get the job. Story 6. During the summer after my freshman year of college, I applied for a part-time job at a mall outlet. Despite having zero retail experience, I got through the first round of interviews without any trouble whatsoever, performing well enough that the assistant manager wanted to give me the job on the spot. Since she didn't have the authority to do that, though, I had to meet with her supervisor a couple days later. It's really just a formality, she told me. You know, to make sure you're not like a serial killer or something. I told her I'd only ever murdered people in video games. It, wasn't as awkward as I'm making it sound. Anyway, when the date of my second interview rolled around, I was in high spirits. The manager had me fill out a brief questionnaire, then started asking me some fairly dull questions. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until a particular inquiry caught me off guard. "What's the most you've ever stolen?" the man asked, giving me a dollar amount. I stammered. "Is that really a question you can ask? I'm just looking for a dollar amount." I racked my brain trying to think of anything I might have actually stolen over the course of my life. I'd certainly gotten up to my fair share of mischief, but actual theft had never been a part of my repertoire. "Zero," I finally said. "I don't think I've ever actually stolen anything." The manager's plastered-on smile suddenly dropped away. "I see. Are you sure?" "Yep, really." The beginnings of a suspicious glower darkened his eyes. "Go ahead and answer again. Just give me a dollar amount." What had started as a dull interview had become a downright bizarre interrogation. I thought about getting up and leaving, but it occurred to me that the whole thing might have been a test to see if I would change my answer. "Zero," I said again. $0. The man sighed and put down his clipboard. "Come on. Do you actually want this job?" he asked, mirroring my own thoughts. I nodded in reply. "Then you need to start being honest with me. Just give me a dollar amount." "Fine, it was $16, I finally lied, pouring sarcasm into my words. $16.42. The transformation was immediate. All of the disapproval evaporated from my manager's face, being replaced by a warm, visibly amused smile. "Hey now, that's not bad," he cheerfully said. "So what was it? A toaster?" I hadn't even bothered to think about what $16.42 might actually purchase. I just said the first thing that had popped into my mind. It didn't seem to matter, though. My answer caused the manager's grin to grow even wider, and he spent the rest of the interview laughing and joking with me. The next day, I got a call, and I was asked if I still wanted the job at the mall. I told them I had already taken a different position elsewhere. For the record, that was also a lie. Story 7. Bit of context. This happened in 2008, and I had just graduated as a massage therapist. Since the economy was in the pits due to the recession, I'm glad this never happened again, MTs were not exactly in high demand, so employers could be picky. The only reason I was even considered for most of my interviews was because I graduated from an accredited school. A lot of the places I interviewed at would turn me down pretty quickly since I didn't have either 10 plus years experience or the body of a supermodel with a massive rack. I'm 100% serious, by the way. Easily, the worst experience was at a chiropractor who did absolutely nothing to hide his contempt for massage therapists. He showed up late, went into his office to check his mail first, then proceeded to have the interview with me in his waiting room. He knew he could pick any MT he wanted and gave 0 Fs about how I felt. When it finally got on the subject of pay, he offered me minimum wage. At the time, your average MT was paid about $20 to $30 an hour, and I was already working a dead-end job at a gas station making $2 more than what he was offering. I brought up how absurdly low his offer was, and he balked, saying that I would be paid as if I was working 40 hours a week, so it would even out. He also clarified that I would be expected to clean the office when not seeing a client, so I'd be an underpaid janitor as well. F that guy. Story 8. This is copied and pasted from another post I replied to about how terrible Amazon is, but it fits this question, so I'm sharing it again. I got an interview with Amazon to be a supervisor. They asked me to drive 1.5 hours to another city to do my second interview, despite the place I applied for being 10 minutes away from where I lived. The pay they were offering was good, so I thought it was worth it. I took a day off from my current job, drove there discovering that they had given me choppy directions, causing me to get lost and have to ask for directions. The place I stopped at rolled their eyes. This wasn't the first time this had happened. They knew exactly where to point me. Red flag number 1. I finally arrive, go to the interview, over 100 people show up. Red flag number 2. They're doing a group interview for the role of supervisor and tell me they accidentally invited too many people and they only have 10 positions available for supervisor and ask me if instead I'd like a starting position instead for barely above minimum wage. Red flag number 3. But then I realize this is way too organized. They expected this many people because they planned this and even had everything set up for a large group interview and even asked me personal questions about myself in front of multiple people. Red flag number 4. I do my best but feel insulted. I drove home feeling cheated. I wasted 4 hours driving and interviewing. Wasted all that gas and lost hours that I could have worked and went out of my way, wasting my precious time going to another town just for them to say, oopsie? They planned this. I realized working for them would be a huge mistake. They had no respect for me as a person, a potential employee, my time, money, gas. What made me think they would care about me once I'm hired? This was clearly a deceptive bait and switch, and I was not falling for it. Shady, shady, shady company. Shame on you, Amazon. I later sent them a letter declining them for the position. I would not be working for them. Story 9. Oh, I got this. My interviewer comes about 30 minutes late, and his first comment is, "You're the best dressed candidate we've had all day." I'm in a polo and khakis. This man is a mid-50-ish, well-groomed man in a button-down shirt and tie. When we get to the interview room, I expect this obviously senior and ranked guy to do the interview, but when we arrive, the manager, in quotes for later, turns out to be an early 20s white guy in a t-shirt with a dyed purple mohawk. I was beyond confused, but whatever. Don't judge a book by its cover. The manager then proceeds to stay sitting as I shake his hand, never motion for me to sit, not ask for my resume at all, and just start with the questions. I'm not a very formal guy, but even I was confused by all this. All the questions are normal stuff, like where do I work now, my school, if I live in the area, that stuff. Then he gets into job-specific questions and starts with, what would you do if you knew an employee was stealing? I obviously tell him that I'd report that employee because you aren't allowed to steal. Well, what if it was the cheapest item in the store, a 99-cent water bottle, and they only did it once? Again, I say stealing isn't allowed, and those costs can add up if they keep stealing. Well, let's say it's your store, G-Money 5100 supply store. What do you do? I tell them if it's my store and one of my employees felt the need to steal water, I'd probably just buy it for them and tell them not to steal in the future. Well, what if you forgot your wallet? You forgot your wallet and you know your employee is behind on rent and their last paycheck hasn't gone through yet and they haven't been paid. At this point, I'm just at a loss for words. The F is going on. Does he want me to say I just let someone steal or something? I genuinely feel like I'm being punked. He notices I'm kind of stuck and just moves on. Alright, how about we test your sales pitches? Imagine someone comes in and wants 4 of the chairs you're sitting in at $25 each. How would you sell them the chair I'm sitting in for $100 each? Again, I'm at a complete loss. What could I possibly say to that? If someone comes in wanting one kind of chair that's obviously a cheaper option, how the F am I supposed to convince them to pay 400% that price for a different chair that's not obviously better in any way, especially on a product I know nothing about? I don't even remember what I said, but there's no way in hell it was coherent. After this, the guy ends the interview without ever having seen my resume, calls me by the wrong name, and sends me on my way. As for why the manager was in quotes earlier, a coworker of mine who knows a worker there told me about a week later that nobody who works in that store has a purple mohawk. All of the district's managers are black, and the older guy I described is the store owner who should have done the interview. I still don't know who did my interview. Story 10. I drove an hour away to an interview at 8 a.m. I waited outside the interviewer's office until 8:30 a.m. with no one to tell me where to go or where she was. Finally, another employee walks by and I ask if they know where this woman is to interview me. They had no idea where she was, why she was late, and told me if she wasn't there yet, I should leave because she probably forgot. Okay. I decide 45 minutes is the cutoff, especially standing in a government building looking like a creep waiting. 8:45 on the dot, she rushes in, flustered, wet hair, and in casual yoga pants. With all the resurgence of patience I could muster, I greeted her and was met with a passive-aggressive scolding of how the interview was at 9, not 8. I triple-checked the email asking me to interview, and it was 8. We conducted a phone interview, and she followed up with an email request to an in-person interview at 8. I was 100% positive of this. I hate being late. Even with this, and I did say, "I'm certain you said 8 a.m., ma'am." She wasn't having it. Conversely, she also went on about why she was late. Surmounting she went to the gym and forgot her underwear to change into and had to stop at a store and buy new ones after working out before coming to work. She told me this in the first 5 minutes. Why? I didn't ask her. Regardless, she looks at my resume, apparently for the first time, because she proceeds to tell me how it's unimpressive and my graduate study should have yielded numerous publications after 1.5 years. In my field, most don't publish until after 3 to 4 years. Even still, she kept saying how I had moved up the interview time, showed me the workspaces, and told me I probably wouldn't be interested in what they do there. I politely told her I had driven, at her request, to be there and interview for employment. I was very interested. She waved me off. As we left, I just tried to hold it together. I was very poor and very desperate for a job. Thanked her, and she told me how great it is to work for the government, how good the benefits, the pension, the time off are, on and on. She said, if you can find an opening working for the government, you should try to check it out and get hired on. Hold up. I just looked her in the face and said, "Yes, ma'am, that was my hope with today's interview. Thank you," and left. And sat in my car and bawled the whole drive home like the desperate loser I was. That was a low one, to be sure. Look, I totally understand being put in the position of being desperate for work, but this sounds like you dodged a bullet. Delayed gratification, I hope you get a job one day, but this one ain't it. Story 11. At the time, I was living in this foreign country for about 2 years, and my language skills were only at an A2/B1 level, so I could understand pretty well, but was terrible at speaking. The interview with 3 people didn't go very well. They spoke in their native language. I tried to respond in said language, couldn't, then switched to English every time. Luckily, everyone spoke English, but I was embarrassed the whole time because my language skills weren't where they should have been. Luckily, due to me being technically overqualified for the job, Bachelor in Science, and that the management is extremely nice and welcoming, I was offered the job that day. It turned out to be the worst interview of my life, but I'm still working there to this day, 2 years later, and improving my language skills. I'm still extremely happy, and I've never had more caring, down-to-earth management in a job. I got really lucky they gave this English speaker a chance. Story 12. This was me actually giving the job interview, so I was the one hiring. We had to dramatically underpay the salespeople, so our choices were horrible, but none were worse than this one creepy guy. He was basically a serial killer. He walked in the conference room and right away I knew he was sketch. I should have ended the interview right when I saw him. Ill-fitting suit, slick back hair, looked shady as F. I didn't want to judge a book by the cover though, so I gave him a chance. I asked the first couple questions, tell me about yourself, that kind of crap. Here's when I asked him to leave. I said, "So tell me why you want to work in sales." He goes, "Well, I'm new in town, so I think this will be a great way to meet people, especially women." And when he said especially women, he winked at me. Ew, just right now typing this gives me the creeps and made me shiver all over. Story 13. I applied to a job and the hiring manager called me when I was busy. Me, Hey, thanks for reaching out to me. I'm actually busy at the moment. Can we set something up for early next week? It was a Friday afternoon when he called. Him. How about later today? Me. I don't have time today. Monday would be much better. Him. I could just do it now then. It won't take very long. Me. Look, I'm very glad you called and I'm super interested in the position, but I'm doing a million things right now and my head isn't in the best place to do an interview. I would really appreciate it if we could reschedule to next week. Him. Pause. You know what? If you're not gonna effing do what I want you to do, then I don't want you working here anyways. Hangs up. Having dodged a bullet there, LMAO. Story 14. Company was downsizing. All employees in a specific yet exclusive division were fired in order to reapply for their position, plus 2 other jobs in the company. You'd either get one of those jobs or be terminated. The subsequent interviews were conducted with a manager and an HR person. First interview in executive suite. Manager asks, "Why aren't you applying for this key supervisory slot?" I had it listed second on my list. Me. I would prefer to stay in my expertise, in which I won a national award. HR. I didn't know awards like that existed. Second interview. Current boss likes me for my existing job, for which I was heavily recruited from another company. HR. Wow, so you're the guy who does this job? I had no idea a real person did it. Third interview. HR person says he's never heard of my division or that employees actually worked at night. I had listed this job, in which I merely served as a minor manager, as third on my preferences. Really didn't want it, but had to list 3. The results? I was retained but transferred to the third dead-end day job. My old award-winning job was given to an aging staffer who never worked in that position or had a clue. The supervisor job went to a brilliant colleague who wanted and deserved it. I quit very soon thereafter and joined a bigger company with better benefits. Skill pays off. After all that, my old company, seeing the error of its ways and lost production and general lack of ability, offered me a bonus to return. Nope, 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 and I'm returning the corporate knife you stuck in my back. Story 15. Many years ago, I was interviewed for an IT director position at a finance and legal consulting firm. Apparently, they were expecting an older-looking person and assumed I was there for the temp/admin positions. I was given a reading comprehension test, a typing test, and a spatial awareness/IQ test. These took a bit over an hour in total. When I was done, the guy said, "Okay, thanks, we'll call you." I asked about speaking to the CIO and the other tech directors for the IT director position. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. They kept me waiting for about 25 more minutes, realizing the mistake, scrambling to pull things together. After 45 minutes of waiting, I told them I was going to leave. The headhunter called me right away, really upset that their mistake may cost her a commission on finding me and wasting my time. We had a very nice discussion about how she needed to screen/brief her clients better, and how they made several bad assumptions that could be an HR issue within the HR department of the consulting firm. I never worked with her again. No idea if they ever found a new IT director. I feel like I dodged a bullet in a potentially disorganized/toxic workplace. I did learn at the time I was typing 80+ WPM mistake-free. Story 16. I was taking a test to be a biology lab tech. I had only recently moved to SoCal, and my issue was that a lot of the test was about local biology that was unfamiliar to me. The test was going so bad that I just switched to writing down jokes because it was a lost cause. One of the final questions was, "What is reclaimed water?" And I drew a comic strip of one character with a glass of water, a second character stole it, and then a fight ensued and the first character finally reclaimed his glass of water. I handed in the test and was about to walk away in horror, and then he was like, "Okay, come into my office." My heart dropped to the floor. We sat in his office, and I think he really liked me, but he started flipping through the test, and I could just see this bewildered look on his face. He told me he'd let me know how I did on the test. And I said something like, "I hope you give extra points for humor." They did not give extra points for humor. I didn't get the job. I did, however, pass the chemistry test for the same organization. Lucky for me, chemistry is the same in all parts of the globe. I worked within close proximity of him for several years. He told me that he had my test hanging in his office for a while. You know, this is a perfect example of when life gives you lemons, make some sweet, sweet lemonade out of that. You're in a hopeless situation, might as well have a little bit of fun. So that's a fun story. Thanks for sharing. Story 17. I was being interviewed for a video editor/post-production kind of job in a video production company. This company was owned by a couple. Their son, at the time maybe 18 or 19, conducted the interview. He asked me to write an essay, which I spent a good hour or so working on, and then went on to interview me, asking a lot of really weird questions, totally unrelated to video production or anything to do with the job. I left the place feeling weird and pissed off about the time spent working on the essay and had absolutely no hopes of getting the job. Eventually, I went on to work on something else. A couple of years later, this couple was murdered. Both were shot while working in their offices. A brief police investigation found the culprit, and the son was arrested and convicted. He's still in jail. So in a certain way, one of my worst job interviews turned out to be the one that might have saved my life. Story 18. I was right out of high school, looking for a job to save money for college. I had an interview at a hotel and casino to be a hotel housekeeper. Not a glamorous job by any means, but I was 18 and needed a job, so I was basically excited to work here. I come in for the interview, dressed in a nice skirt and blazer and heels. I'm ushered into a banquet room full of people. Probably 20 to 25 people are in this room, sitting in chairs facing a podium. My immediate reaction is, F, this is an MLM. I hesitate at the door for a few seconds, and then I think, F it, may as well see what this actually is, and thus begins one of the worst and cringiest experiences of my life. After a few minutes, a woman comes to the podium and explains that this is a group interview. What the F? They go around the room and ask us basic interview questions. It takes about an hour and a half because there are so many people. I come to find out that this is a group interview for every position at the casino and hotel. Restaurant cooks, hotel front desk, casino dealers, etc. Every single position. After the question and answer portion of the group interview, the woman calls a bunch of names and about half of the people go to another room. My name was not called, so I stayed seated. At this point, it's been almost 2 hours and I have to pee. Woman comes back and explains that the remaining people have passed on to the second portion of the interview. The second portion is with the departments we were interviewing for. I and a few other people go to housekeeping, meet with the manager, and are told we need to show them how we work. We literally have to clean hotel rooms for this interview. Keep in mind, we're dressed business casual. I'm wearing heels. I was not prepared to clean effing hotel rooms for free during an interview. Stupidly, I stayed. I have to get on my hands and knees and clean bathroom floors, make beds, vacuum, etc. The room cleaning portion of the interview took maybe 20 to 30 minutes. We are also told we can't use the bathrooms in the room. So I still have to pee. F this. On the third portion of the interview, we're ushered into a different banquet room. At this point, there are maybe 12 of us. At the head of the banquet room is a table with 5 or 6 people. We're told they're the president of the casino and a few other execs. We're told to get in a circle and, get this, dance. We're told to dance because, this is a fun working environment. Barf. At my turn, I hobble out into the middle of the circle and do a stupid little dance, obviously pissed because my feet are killing me and I'm about 3 seconds from pissing myself in front of these people. After the dancing, we're told to sell a pen to the president. I must have blacked out by the anger and embarrassment of this experience because for the life of me, I can't remember what I actually said to try to sell the pen. After almost 4 hours of this interview hell, we're told we can leave. I sprint to the closest bathroom, pee for what feels like 20 minutes, and leave. By the time I get home, I have an email saying I didn't get the job. Story 19. Interview for an entry-level web design position when I was younger and desperately needed a job. Interviewer starts with a list of fast and weird questions. Do you smoke? How often would you say you use your phone? If you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Then the interviewer looks at my resume, puts it down on the table and says, I don't see enough experience on your resume, so why are you here? I told him I had web design experience all over my resume. Interviewer, you're looking for a job. We're looking for someone really special. He puts his head back and squints in a very condescending way. Okay, I'll tell you what. You think you can do this job? Let's pretend you have all the money in the world to market this printer. Sell me this printer. Even though this wasn't relevant to the job position, I go through all online marketing methods. SEO, social media, retargeting, funnels, etc. Interviewer pauses with a smile on his face. Just shows you don't know marketing. You forgot radio, television. There are so many things you missed. I just don't think you have the skills we need. I wasn't sure what all that had to do with web design. Me, well, sure, I'm a web designer. I'm not in a position to be a marketing director. Interviewer sits back with another troublesome smile. Well, let me give you another situation. I stood up and said, I think this interview's over. Interviewer, with a big smile, I'm sorry that you don't have the skills we're looking for. In one of the most glorious moments of my life, I grinned at him and said, go F yourself. On the way out, I told the receptionist I felt sorry that she worked there. I saw that the company posted a job listing for a marketing director soon after. Story 20. September 11th, 2001 at 10 a.m. I had been watching the news early morning and debated whether or not to even go, but it was for a position at a temp agency in Ohio, so I wasn't thinking there would be much of an issue. As I was waiting in the building's waiting area, a custodian rolled a TV out to the area and flipped it on. This was a few minutes before 10 a.m. I know that because I watched the South Tower collapse just a few minutes before the recruiter came out and said my name. Her face was red and puffy from crying. Tear tracks, both dried and fresh, lined her cheeks. I immediately offered to leave and reschedule at a better time. She dismissed that and said it was okay. She needed the distraction. There is a terminal on the credenza behind her. That's a computer station for you youngins. There were lots of cities listed in the first column, then names in the second, then 2 columns with either red or green lights. The first column header read connection, the second header read status. We were going through the standard interview stuff, but she would occasionally say, "Excuse me 1 second," roll over to the terminal and stare at the bottom of the screen for a minute, sometimes sniffle or wipe her eyes, then come back. After the 3rd time, I asked her if everything was okay. She started to apologize, but then said, "No, honestly, it's not." She was good friends with her counterpart in the NYC office for this same staffing firm. When people from my city would move to NYC or vice versa, they would talk. Over the years, they built a relationship. She said that first column of lights was indicating if the corresponding terminal was connected to their nationwide network. It was green for NYC, which was fine. She said what worried her was the second light was also green. That only stayed green for 10 minutes after the last key press. No mouse on these terminals, and her friend/coworker's office was in the North Tower. She had been at that terminal within the last 10 minutes. By this time, it was about 20 minutes after 10, and the interviewer said, "I don't know why she hasn't evacuated. I hope this is a mistake in the system." The terminal had a billboard-based messaging system, so the interviewer thought she was maybe accessing that, but no messages had been left. Other people had a few threads going just asking how she was, but no responses. At 10:28 a.m., we heard a loud collective gasp come from outside the office. This was followed by sounds of crying and other emotions. The front desk admin assistant knocked on the door jamb and said to us, "The North Tower just fell." The interviewer had apparently already spun to the terminal when I was looking at who had knocked, and then received the terrible news. When we looked over at her, she was collapsing. I mean, she literally fell onto the credenza sideways and just slid to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at the terminal screen and the NYC line was kind of blinking every few seconds. Both lights were red. The front desk girl was sitting on the floor with the interviewer, kind of holding her. Honestly, I just took my things and left. I'd met her 30 minutes before. We had experienced the real-time effects of this terrorist tragedy together, but I could not help her. I stopped at a sports bar on the way home and watched the TV coverage until late afternoon. I never called her and she never called me. I think about her every year on September 11th. I used to remember her name, but I don't anymore. I hope she's okay. Story 21. This was quite a while ago, maybe about 2010, and the recession was still hitting the job market pretty badly. Here I am, graduated from college a few years before, and looking for anything. I interviewed for a job calling people trying to recruit them for a 2-year college. I think it was National American University. I had experience with customer service and some phone work doing tech support at my college, and this would be within my abilities. About halfway through the interview, I could tell it was going poorly. The guy interviewing me was asking me to give a sales pitch on recruiting, and I was failing. We got to the end, and he was upfront about saying I wouldn't be a good fit for what they needed. However, he did give me a bunch of great advice on how to properly interview and be able to sell myself to a prospective employer. He even did a little coaching session with me. I knew he could see I was desperate, and I was unemployed, and he took time to help me out for my future attempts. I did take his advice and was able to get a decent job eventually. I've always used the tips he gave me, and they've helped me greatly. So to that guy, thanks. Story 22. A marketing internship the summer before my senior year of college. I remember showing the job description to my dad, and he told me it was going to be door-to-door sales. I didn't really believe him, and I showed up at 9 a.m. for the interview. Right away, I knew Dad was right about it not being a true marketing internship. There were 5 other applicants also waiting in the lobby with me, all for the same position. Behind a closed door, we could hear people shouting and laughing, and the receptionist explained that they like to have fun, and this was their Tuesday morning trivia game. While the employees were playing their game, the receptionist made small talk for over half an hour. I'm wondering why they dragged us in at 9 if they knew no one would be able to interview us then. Finally, trivia ends, and it's time for us to get paired up with a current employee to shadow for the day. This was not explained beforehand, and not what I would consider an interview. After all the other applicants are paired up and leave, to do door-to-door sales or whatever, I'm told my person wasn't there that day. Now I'm really annoyed about 1, being lied to about the interview process, and 2, the fact that they attempt to reschedule me when they knew my person wasn't going to be there. The receptionist takes me into another room to show me a diagram of the company structure that's a pyramid and tells me that pay is commission-based. I leave and I'm relieved a week later when I'm told I didn't get the job. Story 23. Pre-COVID Skype interview for a programming job in the health field. Scheduled for 7 p.m., which is already ridiculous, but they even managed to be 15 minutes late. The guy who interviewed me was a tech guy. Spent the first half of the interview telling me how hard and stressful their job is, and how they need someone who's basically available 24/7 in case of emergencies, and that people should be proud to work with them because their work is super essential, serious, important, etc. Spent most of the second half of the interview asking me increasingly personal questions like, do you smoke? Do you live alone? Are you single? Are you married? Do you have any health issues? What do your parents do for a living? Etc. When it comes to when and how did your father die, I say I don't see how that's relevant, and he's like, oh, just curious. Finally, I tell him I'm not interested in the job because I don't think it's a good fit, and he immediately gets defensive, first asking me, how do you know if you haven't even tried? And then telling me, you'll never get anywhere if you're scared of confrontation. I just tell him, well, thanks for the advice, and refuse the offer. Anyway, COVID hits and they make a test screening app for the local government. Guess what company has been recently involved in a pretty huge security/privacy scandal because anyone could see anyone's COVID status just by entering their basic info. Edit. Since it's the first time one of my comments got a few upvotes on Ask Reddit, I'm going to add a few more details that I remembered. I didn't apply for this job. The company contacted me on LinkedIn, and the first time they called me on the phone to schedule the interview, I spoke with a girl who whispered almost inaudibly for the entire call. It literally sounded like someone calling 911 from inside a closet. The guy who interviewed me only ever called me by my last name and didn't even try to make eye contact. He spent the entire interview looking at my resume with the snootiest look on his face. I'm a native Android developer with some iOS experience, and they made it sound like that was what they were looking for, but it turns out they build all their apps using a proprietary cross-platform network. Yikes! During the interview, I tell them I'm a pretty creative person who really enjoys working on the UI/UX side of things, and his reply boiled down to, we don't do that crap here. When he asked to see a project I worked on, I direct him to the Play Store and show him the last published app I developed at my previous job, for a huge retail client, by the way, and at first he tries to insinuate I didn't actually work on it, then claims it's nothing special because it's nothing like what they do. No crap, Sherlock, and thank effing God. Despite his ridiculously confrontational and demeaning tone and my clear refusal, he actually asked me, so you're not interested? Like 3 or 4 other times before ending the interview. A couple weeks after the interview, the same company contacts me on LinkedIn again with the exact same message as the first time, like they forgot I had already interviewed and refused their offer. I have a much more experienced and qualified friend who also interviewed there before I did. He met the same guy and had the exact same interview experience. I initially assumed the interviewer was acting like that because I'm a junior developer, but it turns out he's simply a socially inept a-hole whose job should probably be anything other than doing interviews/interacting with other human beings. I also have another friend who actually works there. He was basically their first hire, and they treat him a bit more respectfully than most other employees, often going to him to ask for advice that they don't listen to. Most common question they ask him apparently is, why can't we get anyone to work for us? After the COVID app scandal a couple months ago, he said the company basically plunged into chaos and hasn't yet recovered. Probably never will. Honestly, I'm just glad it wasn't my first interview experience, because I probably would have been traumatized for the rest of my life. I feel bad for anyone who's been in that position and or couldn't afford to refuse the job. Edit 2. I went back to read on the COVID app scandal, and it's actually a lot worse than I remembered, since they didn't just accidentally give everyone access to their users' COVID status, but to their entire medical records stored on their servers. Considering that this company developed a lot of the IT infrastructure for public health in my area, I'm sure there's no need to explain how huge of a effing mess they got themselves into. Story 24. When I was looking for a job, I went through an agency. I went for an interview about 6 years ago, which was one of the strangest situations I've ever been in. I was to work in the financial services arm of a business. I arrived for the interview and was put in a waiting room. In the next room, I'm fairly sure this was deliberate, one of the staff was in there asking for a pay raise, quote, because I'm saving for a house. The manager said something along the lines of course, your goals are our goals here. We're a family. He then comes and gets me, walks me through a load of miserable looking people in a call center looking set up to an office no larger than a broom cupboard where the department I was applying for a job in was based. Can't remember the specifics of the interview after that, but I thought I'd made it clear I wasn't interested in working for the company. I was pretty shocked when the agency called and said the company wanted to offer me the position. I declined and explained why, and I wasn't the first person to say that apparently. Story 25. I was fresh out of university and had spent months applying for hundreds of jobs, getting no response more often than not, so when I finally received an invite to an interview, I was elated. It was further away than I liked, but it was in my field and would be decent experience. As I had to take public transport, I left with time to spare. Everything went brilliantly until I arrived at the company I was interviewing with. 1. I arrived 15 minutes early, approached the front desk and politely introduced myself and informed the receptionist I have an appointment with Miss A. The receptionist raises her brows at me and tells me this person has no appointments today as she never works in the office on Tuesdays. Cue panic. 2. I pull out my phone, which thankfully has the email confirmation, and I show this to her. She nods, tells me the same thing again. I ask her if she can please call the interviewer. She rolls her eyes, but does as I ask. After 3 rings, the interviewer picks up, I suppose. The receptionist nods, hangs up and tells me to wait over there, waving me off in the direction of the entrance. 3. A little confused, I head back to where I came from. As there's no waiting area, seats or benches, I stand there quietly. Half an hour passes and still no one has come to collect me. In that same time, however, a number of other young people like myself, looking out of place, have arrived. 4. 45 minutes late, a girl who cannot have been much older than myself comes down, calls out 5 names and gestures for those people to follow her. She got my first name wrong, but it was close enough that I did not question it and followed. 5. The 5 of us follow her sheepishly into a room which has 5 tables and chairs ready and waiting. Each of us is directed to one of the tables and informed we'll be completing a number of assessments. We're also directed to present the diplomas/credentials and passports we were asked to bring. 6. A multiple choice test is laid out in front of us and Miss A leaves us alone. The test, in reality, is one of those thinly veiled personality tests which take no more than 10 minutes to complete. Fine. A bit of warning next time maybe, but fine. 7. About 5 minutes into the test, Miss A swoops in and takes my diploma and passport from my desk and starts to walk away. Cue suspicion. So I call her name and ask her what she thinks she's doing. She informs me all these will be copied for their administration. I quickly tell her she will do no such thing, and there's no need to do that until after I've been hired. She tells me that if I don't comply, I might as well leave. I tell her that if she walks off with my passport and diploma without reason, I'll have no option but to suspect her of attempted identity theft. She grumbles some more and puts the items back on my desk. The individuals around me now voice similar concerns, and the papers are all swiftly returned. 8. Miss A leaves us waiting for another 30 minutes. She then returns, takes away the test results, and tells us we will now each have a 10-minute interview. For some reason, I am left to last. When I'm finally called into the room, I can immediately see the CV she has in front of her is not mine. 9. She starts by calling me the wrong name. I correct her. She follows by getting the university I studied at wrong. I correct her. I tell her she has the wrong CV. She tries to correct me. This is followed by more statements which are all wrong, such as, I see here you've done an internship at ABC, which I counter by, no, I did an internship at XYZ. You have the wrong CV. She is, however, incorrigible. This continues for what feels like an eternity when she turns to the personality test. She draws in a sharp breath and goes, "Yeah, I don't think you'll be a good match for this company." I raise my brows at her and keep quiet. To which she goes, "Well, now you correct me and tell me why you would love to work here." I tell her thank you for your time, grab my stuff, and get the hell out of there. Easily the worst interview ever. Story 26. Showed up early, was told my interviewer wasn't ready yet and would I mind waiting. No big deal. I am early after all. Interview time comes and goes. About 5 minutes after the interview was scheduled, I go back to the front desk and ask if they're ready for me. I'm told just a few more minutes. Repeated interview time, 15 plus minutes. Please wait. I've learned that while it can be tricky to tell at an interview whether the place will be a good work environment, if it's an unhealthy place, that's easier to notice. Companies are most likely to treat you well while they're trying to get you to work for them. So, seeing this red flag, I simply tell the receptionist, I'm no longer interested in the position. Thanks, but I'm leaving. As I'm gathering my coat/keys, the person interviewing me comes rushing in the front doors, visibly upset. Apparently, whoever I had spoken with when scheduling the interview had given me the wrong location. Thing is, my interviewer/possible supervisor now starts getting all aggressive about how this screw-up is ruining her day and why didn't I confirm the location, because I'd know which location she was working each day, and just really getting heated. I just said, I don't think this is a good idea. Thank you for your time. She then started screaming at me for wasting her time as I walked out the building. I sometimes wonder how people like that ever rise to positions of authority. The answer to that last question is simple. Connections, nepotism, just knowing people who needs to be qualified for a job when you've got a buddy that can slide you in the door, right? Story 27. Applied for a desktop support position. $15 an hour advertised. A bit on the low side, but I was out of work and needed to pay bills. Sat down for the interview with two guys. Interviewer A introduced himself as the manager/network project manager and introduced interviewer B as the server guy. Indicated he was looking for someone to bridge that gap between the two of them when things got busy. He wanted someone who could take the overflow of work and handle project management tasks, network configs, server admin work, and handle the day-to-day desktop requests of the office. Cue my eyes getting as big as saucers. I apologized and indicated I thought I was in the wrong interview. I applied for a desktop support position for $15 an hour. In response, oh no, you're in the right spot. It's desktop supports and a few other tasks as we need to assign them to you. There was a typo in the job advert though. It's only $13 an hour. I just stood up, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, apologized for wasting their time, and left. So let me get this straight. Not only are they adding more responsibilities to your job, but they're also paying you less. Yeah, you're totally in the right to get up and walk out of there. Story 28. I applied for a full-time job as an assistant brewer and had just graduated from a brewing diploma program. We had 2 phone interviews, both about 30 minutes long. Then I drove 90 minutes from home to attend an in-person interview. I got a tour of the new brewery, which was waiting for their brewery license. They show me all this janky but brand new equipment, and I'm thinking I could do this long enough to find another job. We interviewed for about 30 minutes after the tour. Then the owners dropped a bomb on me. We know you applied for a full-time job, but we were thinking we might hire 2 part-time assistant brewers. If we do that route, we would hire 2 people to work 20 hours per week and would probably promote one of the 2 after 6 months to a full-time position. Would you be interested in the job if we went that route? My exact words were, absolutely not. I have to move to work this job, and I need 40 hours to pay for rent and student loans. I'm not moving to work part-time here and part-time at McDonald's. They didn't call me with an offer. They closed 12 to 18 months later. Story 29. I had been temping for nearly a year at a bunch of places, while intermittently going on interviews for full-time permanent jobs. The first offer I got was for an assistant payroll position at a smallish financial firm, and as hard up for cash as I was at that point, I turned it down because of a few red flags in the interview. Firstly, the place had a general vibe of restrained panic and disarray. As I was being led to the conference room, I was told the person who was supposed to be interviewing me wasn't in the office today, so I was going to meet with a group of 3 people instead, including one dialing in by phone. Okay, weird, but not the end of the world. Then, in the interview, the person connecting by phone couldn't hear everyone in the conference room, and kept talking despite one of the other employees trying, like 8 times, to interrupt. Okay, tech mishap. Still not too bad, but a little cringe. Then the team asked me if I had any questions. I had been reviewing some of their materials and kept seeing a particular acronym that I didn't recognize, so I figured it must be company specific. So I inquired what it stood for, and I crap you not one person in the room knew. That's when I really started to get a bad feeling. Finally, as I was being walked out by one of the interviewers, I asked him to confirm this was indeed a temp to perm role, and he went, hang on, and disappeared for a few minutes. Then came back and, without breaking his stride, went, yep, temp to perm, and went around a corner. I showed myself out. That night, the temp agency said I had already received an offer, and I knew they were looking for anybody with a pulse to fill that role ASAP. So I declined and went to my next job interview. Got a way better offer there, and I've been happily employed ever since. Trust your gut. Story 30. I did a technical interview with Amazon. It was supposed to be an hour, and about 35 to 40 in, I recognized that my solution had an issue with it. Interviewer was only interested to see if I could code a solution in that hour. Didn't care that it was correct, except for a certain type of edge case. I explained the issue, and that I didn't know how to solve it, and he was like, okay, bye. Would have thought being honest about the issue, just talking through the problems with my solution, and admitting it would get me some credit, but no. I just didn't know how to solve that case in the 10 minutes that were left. I got a comparable offer in my town the next week anyways. I've also shown up for an interview 2 hours early, not knowing the interviewer's assistant was in a different time zone, when I knew the interviewer and I were in the same one. My bad for not reading the email thoroughly, but that wasn't the reason I didn't get the job. Story 31. Had an interview in 2019 that was a never-ending nightmare and awkward as F. Got recommended by a former colleague for a data science consultant job at their new firm. A very fancy and highly paid consultancy. Their office looked like from Suits. Everything screamed money. Apparently, they were building up a data science unit with my colleague heading it. Until that point, one guy did all this stuff on his own. Would have doubled my salary, and it was basically all the stuff I'm already doing every day at my current firm, plus I would get more freedom to bring in my own ideas. Sounded perfect. Went there and my colleague wasn't allowed to participate in the interview due to some compliance stuff. Instead, their director of HR and the guy that did everything by himself for the past 2 years were there. The HR lady had no effing clue what the job is about and was probably only there for compliance too. She just sat there and smiled the whole time. Gave me some cookies. Meanwhile, I'm talking with the guy and he dodges every single one of my questions. Like literally 5 minutes in and I already knew this crap is over. Couldn't tell me what he's doing the whole day. The conversation flow wasn't happening. He just stated stuff. For example, we have here problem A we need to solve, and every time he presented one of his problems, I already had done something similar or even identical in the past and explained to them that I'm able to do this and how I would do this. Instead of engaging me with the problem-solving stuff, he cuts me off every time after 2 sentences and starts pointing out several times how great his statistics skills are and started rambling on, like just throwing math terms around without any context. And I'm just sitting there confused, like, okay. Then it hit me. He had no clue. He doesn't even have a STEM degree. Totally looked like he BS'd his way into this job. And since there weren't any other people in the company with STEM skills, nobody got that he was faking it. And the HR lady isn't getting it. Just sits there and smiles, nods, and throws cookies at me. 15 minutes in, that guy starts pitching another person for the job that I'm just getting interviewed for. I'm just staring at the HR lady again to see her reaction about that, but she just smiles and nods. And I start looking for any hidden camera since this crap just can't be happening. At this point, I really wanted to leave, but since I was there due to her recommendation, I didn't want to make my colleague look bad. So I sat through that crap for 50 minutes. He even asked me if I know how to handle a Google-like database search tool, basically asking me if I know Boolean logic. I have a background in physics and CS. I can effing concept and code that tool. Apart from that, the tool is easy to use. Like, it takes 1 hour max training for an intern. I use it daily for 3 to 4 years. And in the end, having dodged like 15 to 20 questions, they dare to ask me that closing standard question if I have any questions left. And I'm just sitting there staring into the dark abyss opening in front of me while shaking my head. On my way out, the HR lady already talked about me coming back for a case interview round. Like, she really didn't get what happened in that room. And I was just like, yeah, sure. Walked home confused as F, questioning if that really just happened. Did I say something stupid? Did I get the name wrong? Why the F this went so bad and was over after 5 minutes? Obviously, it took them 2 weeks to write me a BS rejection mail that didn't make any sense in context of the interview. Apparently, the guy said he has no confidence in my skills, despite the fact that I was able to answer every one of his problems with, I've solved this before and this is how to do it. All right. Story 32. I found a company by looking up warehouses on Google Maps and cold calling for engineering positions. I figured they were either making something or storing something. I figured if I take the initiative, someone would appreciate that effort and give me a fair shot since my networking connections weren't working out. I got an interview and went in and everything was going great until the man who had just kind of sat there the entire time spoke up. He started talking about how good the company was and how they treat everyone like family, and stressed that I would only have to come in on Sundays occasionally, and they generously gave people 3 whole days off per year. He then asked what my salary expectations were. I gave him a highball offer to test the waters, but nothing more than 10% above what's normally expected. He then offered me $30,000 below my offer and asked me why I needed so much money. I told him that I had student loans to pay off. His response? That's not my problem. Either way, despite being offered way more than I was making at the time, I realized I had way more self-respect than that and turned down his offer. A few months later, and I finally got in contact with their direct competitor. They offered me a much higher salary, no weekend workdays, flexible hours, good 401k match, and 15 days off per year, as well as national holidays. Know your worth. Story 33. One was for an administrative position. After the terrible online Excel literacy test that didn't allow you to use keyboard shortcuts, WTF, I asked the manager what an average day would look like. You'd make copies of exams for the professors, put together course packets, keep track of student enrollment numbers, and make sure all these things were filed. You don't need an administrative person. You need a student worker. I asked how long the last person was in this position and why did they leave. She said she was here about 4 months. We're just having a hard time finding the right person. Nope. Pretty sure it's you that's the issue here. I thanked her for her time and asked her to withdraw my name from consideration. Had an interview with a fairly large company for an entry-level graphic design position. They started it off in an extremely tiny room, like a broom closet with a desk, and I had to take a test, basic math, science, and English. It was in a little packet like a standardized test you'd do in school. The interviewer made me break the seal in front of him, and then he initialed and dated each page. He said, "Sorry, they made us do this, so there's no cheating." I asked if that was an issue previously. He said that people would try and get their friends hired and slip them the test in advance. Then went on to say how it's mostly college kids in these lower positions, and it's basically a revolving door, so they want to make sure that the people they hire are qualified. He got about halfway through the booklet, and I told him, "You know what, I'm sorry, but I already don't feel this job isn't going to be for me," and started to get up. He got snarky. "How would you know? You haven't even interviewed." But with that attitude, I'm going to ask you to leave. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Female dog, you can't hire me. I quit. Story 34. I interviewed for TCF Bank. The manager was meant to interview me and brought me into the office, and a teller came to the back to ask for assistance. She obliged and left, begging my forgiveness on the way out. She came back about 20 minutes later to tell me she needed to stay up front a little while longer. After about 45 minutes, she finally came back to the office to let me know there was a rush and they were understaffed. During the interview, she broke the news that the position was part-time with basically no benefits whatsoever. I had applied for full-time and was told initially I was interviewing for full-time. The interview gets interrupted once more, at which point I start looking up other jobs on my phone. When the manager gets back to complete the interview, she says she'd like to hire one if I can pass the background checks and all that, and asks if I'd like the position / when I could start. I say yes and give a date. 2 weeks later, I got offered a better job by a mile before my very first shift and just didn't show up. Story 35. I was 17, and the place where my programming teacher's husband worked was looking for a data entry person. At least, I think they were. I was never told what the job actually was until I was in the interview, and even then I wasn't really paying attention, for the soon-to-be obvious reasons. Anyways, my friends were in a band, and the night before the interview, they played a show where they opened for the bands Black Tide and Gemini Syndrome. It was the biggest show they've ever played, and at one point, one of our friends took us out into the parking lot and was like, "That was amazing! I make moonshine in a cave. We should all do shots to celebrate." Then I woke up the next morning. Going to that interview was miserable. It was around 18 hours later. I was still drunk, yet at the same time had the worst hangover in my life. They kept asking me to fill out papers, and I could barely hold the pen. During the actual interview, I was being interviewed by the most boring and dry human being imaginable, all while I was trying to locate a trash can I could throw up in. I'm glad I didn't get the job, though. I ended up applying for a great job later that year that I absolutely love and have worked ever since. Story 36. Went to a job interview for a welding position early on in my welding career, maybe 3 years in, around 2008 or 2010. My dad was a machinist for about 30 years, in and around the Houston area. He worked for every major machine shop that has ever had a base in Houston. No exaggeration, when he recently received his VA benefits, they asked him if he seriously had 600 plus jobs in his life. 600! 600 jobs tied to his social security number. It's hard to believe, but my dad changed jobs every 2 weeks at times, sometimes more. Anyways, I went into this interview. Guy asked me, "So, your last name is blah 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 blah," "Are you so-and-so's son?" I'm like, "Yep, that's my dad." And he says, "Just so you know, you're never going to work here. Your dad is a crazy son of a female dog." I said, "Okay, what does that have to do with me?" He said, "You're not working here," jokingly and laughing. And he begins to tell me all these stories about my dad, most of which I was well aware of. My dad once loaded his toolbox up in his truck, strapped it down, and proceeded to do white smoke donuts in the middle of this machine shop. And that's really not even the worst thing he's done. He left behind him a legacy, I tell ya, but he didn't put up with being mistreated or the mistreatment of others. There was a machine shop on Westheimer at one point. I don't think they're there anymore. And they used to fly this huge rebel flag with the Texas flag. No American flag, though. They wouldn't hire blacks. This was mid-80s. My dad really needed a job, but told them to F off due to their racist bullcrap. There's a lot more to that story, but that sums it up. So in this interview, this guy and some other douche canoe were in there taking jabs at my dad, and what a nutcase he was. I just got up and left. He definitely has a screw loose, but he's not a bad guy. He just doesn't put up with crap from people, and it's been a big part of his downfall and his success and ability to keep a job. It's taught me to pick and choose my battles wisely, and also when to lawyer up. You can't physically fight your way through life, but you can sue the F out of people. Story 37. I've had a couple that felt like a waste of time because the interviewer asked about my experience in a specific subject I listed in my resume, and I described it and they enthusiastically asked questions, and then 20 minutes later said, "Well, this job has nothing to do with that. Bye." Usually happens when I apply for a customer service job that doesn't require a degree, and then they ask about my degree and then act like I couldn't possibly have read the job description correctly, like, "Well, this is just a cashier position." Like, yeah, I know. The worst was this past summer. I needed a job because of COVID, and I applied at a cell phone store. Had 2 phone interviews with the HR manager. He told me to expect a call from the store manager to set up a formal Zoom interview by next Wednesday. He never called me, even after I emailed him, and got another job offer shortly after, so I just assumed they went with someone else and was mildly annoyed. Then, over a full month later, I got spammed with a bunch of calls all in a row at like 8 a.m. No voicemail or anything, so I assumed they were robocalls. Then I got a text with a Zoom link that I didn't open, and a few minutes later, a text saying, "Hi Kathy, are you available for your interview?" And I was like, "That's not my name, and I don't have any interviews scheduled, so I think you have the wrong number." And the reply was, "Oh, sorry, I meant your actual name. This is so-and-so from the cell phone store." And then just wordlessly sent another Zoom link a few minutes later, like I was going to do an impromptu video on a Sunday morning, and I was like, huh? Story 38. The one that sticks out to me the most is when I interviewed for a sales job in an office building that looked like a literal jail. I was positive that I had the wrong place, but I walked inside and saw a thin line of yellow tape that said, "Interview on floor 7, written in Sharpie next to an elevator that looked older than Christ himself. Get up there and there's about 15 people squashed together. This is after the COVID outbreak, waiting to be interviewed with only one wearing a mask. I walk into the waiting room with my mask firmly on my face, and the first thing the intern says is, "You don't have to wear that if you don't want to." I then seat myself as far away from everyone else as possible, while the Will Ferrell parody of Eurovision plays on the waiting room TV. Finally get interviewed, and it turns out the sales job is for selling windshield wipers? And the whole outline of how to go through this process is handed to me on a piece of paper that looked like a second grader's first attempt at using Microsoft Word, with colorful text and poorly cropped images to boot. They said that I would get paid minimum wage and that the pay rate that they included in the job listing included a standard rate of what employees usually make on commission. Stopped the interviewer mid-sentence, said thanks but no thanks, and walked out through the waiting room as the intern asked somebody else where Eurovision took place. Story 39. It was a panel interview at the Arts and Sciences department of a college. They would go down the line and each would ask a question. It became quickly obvious that some had prepared for this and others had apparently downloaded a list of questions off a personality test. Interviewer 1. What's your biggest strength at work? Interviewer 2. Describe the happiest moment of your life. Interviewer 3. How would you deal with this tricky scenario with the vendor? Interviewer 4. Describe the saddest moment of your life. It went on like this for several rounds. It was bonkers. The saddest moment of my life question almost had me in tears. They also asked what my spirit animal was. I shrugged and said I never really thought about it, but they kept pressing, so I said my favorite animal, a caracal. Then the next person asked what a caracal was, and so I told them it was a wild cat. The next person asked, then why didn't you just say a cat the first time? And then the next person said, "You'll never get this one. Guess what my spirit animal is?" Like, based on the 10 minutes you've been sitting here asking stupid questions, I guessed a bear. And he looked at me like I was the stupid one and said, "It's an emu?" And I just said, "You're right, I never would have guessed that." I did not get the job. Story 40. Found a job on Craigslist for interviews. Get to this shady as hell waiting room, no signage, nothing, and I'm like, weird, but okay. The interviewer was super high strung and odd, so I called my wife and was like, "Hey, this is weird, just stay on the phone." Get to the back, and he has this whole spiel he spews out. Starts the interview immediately, then I say, "Well, I didn't see any signage. What exact company is this, and what do you do?" His response, "That doesn't matter, I'll let you know when you're hired." So I push, and I'm like, "Well, I'd like to know what company I'm interviewing with before I fill out my social in this application." His response, "Don't worry, just write it down." So now I'm on high alert, like this isn't right. So I said, "Well, I'm done with this interview until you tell me what company I'm interviewing for." So he tries to talk and basically sidesteps my questions. So I stand up and say, "Well, I think this interview is over until you can tell me what company this is for." So he picks up my resume and says, "Well, I think you'd be a great fit." I pick up my purse and turn to walk out and tell him he's making me uncomfortable, and he sheepishly says it's for Kirby vacuums. Am I still interested? I say, "No, I'm not, thank you. I really thought I was about to be caught up in some weird adult content or trafficked." Don't interview at a company they won't even tell you the name of. There's typically a reason. Story 41. I was an electronics tech and went to an interview with a Bay Area company that designed read/write/record heads for hard drives and other magnetic media. The designers were doctorates or double doctorates, and they squiggled funny numbers on a collection of whiteboards. Engineers with master's degrees would interpret this arcanery and turn it into CAD. Machines would then turn out several thousand of these on a silicon wafer. Engineers with bachelor's degrees would remove a sample of the parts from the wafers and put them on a simple test jig. They also designed and built the test jig. They needed a trained monkey to write down the findings. That was me. The interviewer took me through a maze of twisty corridors and cube farms, all alike, as he showed me everything being done. It was a Saturday, so the place was empty. I mentioned the poor quality of the test and said I could rebuild it for them. That was shot down. They wanted a monkey. I saw some familiar formula on the whiteboard and asked why the PhDs were solving them individually instead of using MathCAD or Excel. "You can do that?" "Sure," I shrugged. Got it in college. This excited the interviewer, who wanted to hire me then and there just so I could automate the math. But by this time, the job just made me want to flee. I would be so bored there. So I spent the next half hour turning down the job, while trying to find my way out of the labyrinth. He wouldn't show me. He really wanted me there. Finding the parking lot felt like I had won the game. I was never so happy to drive away from a job. Story 42. I once interviewed for a job at a nonprofit. It would have just been a paperwork filing, temp to maybe permanent later type job. Nothing special, nothing difficult, not a job that anybody would be thrilled about. I applied for it though through a temp agency as I tend to work freelance and thought it might be a nice day job for a while. If it went permanent, all the better. During the phone interview, the woman I spoke with came out of the gate with something like, "You know, I see that you have a degree in philosophy, and this job doesn't require a lot of deep thinking. I don't know if you'll find the work all that interesting." I was rather taken aback. Who opens an interview like that? I pointed out that I wasn't aware of anybody who found administrative jobs like that to be their calling in life, and that I could do deep thinking on my own time, but the weariness she had towards me remained for the rest of the otherwise standard interview. Bizarrely, I got to the second round. That interview was in person, with somebody else, and completely normal. As you might guess, I didn't get the job. Overall, I get wanting to hire people who'll be engaged and not likely to leave ASAP, but being concerned that people might find paperwork boring, I hate to see them try and find a custodian. If I recall, they also wanted a college graduate, so I'm quite sure what degree field they would have found more acceptable. Story 43. Walked in for a job interview for a clerical position, think accounts receivable, when I was 20. Pay was supposed to be $12 per hour Monday through Friday. I'm dressed well and am generally excited about the idea. When I arrive, they tell me the interview is actually being conducted next door. I head over, it's a chicken processing plant, and I find out the interview isn't for the job I applied for. It's for a third shift position cleaning the insides of the processing equipment with hot water and steam. You apparently have to crawl through it holding a hose spewing out nearly boiling water. Best part is that it paid minimum wage. I noped out fast, and the interviewer had the nerve to get upset that I was leaving after receiving this information. My second worst was when I showed up for a 6 a.m. interview at an abandoned-looking carpet factory, but there was no one there except a homeless guy. I stayed for an hour or so and then left because I got worried it was some sort of setup, and I was going to be robbed/murdered. I called later, through their public number, to make sure I got to the right people, and they claimed I should have waited, that they were just running late. Story 44. I've had many horrible interviews. I'm old, and have been in the workforce for a long time. I'm not sure which one was the worst, but here are the top 5. For the record, I have an accounting/finance/HR background. A. I was interviewing for a position with the federal government in a department that provides income relief, i.e. welfare type stuff. After going through a battery of pencil and paper tests, I was called back to sit in an interview with 12 of the staff. 90% of the interview went like this. If you discovered that someone was, insert sketchy but unclear situation, would you report them? Me. If the rule stated that I had to report them, then yes. Well, what do the rules state? Me. I'm not sure because I've never worked here, but I'd follow any rules or policies that were outlined. We need you to tell us what the rules would say in this particular situation. Me. Are your rules publicly available? No, they aren't. Me. Then I'd have no way of knowing how to answer that question. The entire interview boiled down to me supposedly having knowledge about rules that were never made public. They didn't offer me the job. B. I went for an interview at some non-profit, and the entire interview consisted of the interviewer rambling endlessly about who's dating who's cheating on who, how so-and-so likes his coffee, how much she hates the job. She didn't ask me one question. She just rambled. After about 30 minutes, she stood up, shook my hand, thanked me for coming, and I never heard from her again. C. Computer retailer with multiple locations. I was interviewed by 2 people who took turns criticizing me. One of them complained about every prior job I'd had, how I had to be stupid to work in certain industries, banking, real estate, and government, argued with me and yelled when I explained why I took each position, and the other one glared at me and told me I blinked a lot. It was probably my disbelief showing. Toward the end of the interview, they handed me a 2-sided, 12-page job description, which I quickly deduced would be impossible for any human being to perform. I live in a spread-out city that has almost 1 million people, and much of what they'd requested entailed driving to 6 different locations each day and doing 6 to 8 hours work at each location. In traffic, the driving time alone would take hours. Then they complained that everyone they'd hired previously was lazy and couldn't do what it takes. I told them that no one could do the job. At that point, I didn't care. I explained just how ridiculous the list of tasks was. To my surprise, they offered me the job, which paid 10 cents per hour more than minimum wage. If I managed to last for 6 months of this superhuman bullcrap, they'd give me an additional 10 cents per hour. They couldn't understand why I didn't want the job for $8 an hour less than I was already making. D. Interview for a warehouse accountant. I walked in, the owner introduced himself, shook my hand, sat me down, and asked if I was here for the interview. I said yes. After that, he refused to speak. There was just silence. I took the initiative and told him about myself, my education, my experience, and asked some questions, which he didn't answer. After about 30 minutes of him just sitting there, I thanked him for his time and left. Not sure if this was the worst, but it was certainly the most bizarre. E. A construction company. The interview went wonderfully at first. The lady who was doing the interview had a good sense of humor, was engaging, gave me lots of details on the job and the company, seemed to be really likable. The pay and benefits were good, and I got a great vibe. Then she asked me if I know how to doctor/fix the books, as in hide large purchases and launder money. I told her that doing such things was illegal and I really wasn't comfortable with it. And that's when the interview ended abruptly. Her exact words were, "You're of no use to us. Get the F out." There are more, but those were the worst. Story 45. I was sent on this interview through a recruiter I had been working with for a little bit. I was very clear with my recruiter that I wasn't looking for a job with lots of expected overtime. I didn't mind occasional overtime, but I did not want it built into my schedule or consistently expected. He offered me a position that required 55 hours a week, which I turned down because that's not what I'm looking for, as I thought I was clear. On to this next interview. It's for a job with lower requirements than my current skill set, which I don't mind since it seemed to pay pretty well, and I was also wanting to just make my recruiter happy. I get a tour of the facility and all my tasks and requirements and expectations, but nowhere does the manager I'm interviewing with mention hours. So I asked what to expect for a schedule, and he mentioned sometimes they work weekends. Okay. I push further and ask him specifically what is the start and end time of the days, and he defers on how it's always changing and he can't be sure. At this point, I'm pretty done with this interview, as I don't like the job and the manager, and I really don't like how he's not seeming to be honest about anything. I just keep drilling him until he admits it's usually 6 days a week at 11-hour days, and sometimes a 7th day. I'm pretty baffled at this, and definitely tell him right there that this is not what I'm looking for at all, and I'm not sure how we even ended up on this interview together. I leave, and about 15 minutes later, I give my recruiter a call wondering what the F just happened. He starts off the call by telling me he heard the interview didn't go well, and asking me why I was so focused on the hours. He proceeded to tell me I was afraid of hard work because I didn't want to work on an assembly line for 70 hours a week. LMAO. It also explains why the salary was what it was, which brought the wage to below minimum wage at those hours. Story 46. I was interviewing for a job at a restaurant as a hostess. I was like 16, never worked at a restaurant before. The questions went okay, but they wanted me to come back to work a shift on the floor to see how I vibed with the team. About 10 minutes into the shift, the girl that was supposed to be training me leaves me alone at the front to, quote, go do something. 2 people come in wanting to be seated. I take them to a table in an open section, but they get upset and say they want to sit over there, where there are no other people around by a window. I tell them that that section isn't open, but they insist. 16-year-old me was like, F it, IDK. And they went and sat in the closed section. 5 minutes later, a waitress comes up and yells at me because she had just cashed out, but now she couldn't go home because I seated someone in her section. I said sorry, tried to explain what happened. I asked her if the other hostess could just cover them because it was one table that was supposed to be in her section anyways, but she just stormed off. Not related, but I also needed to pee at one point, but no one had showed me where the staff bathroom was, and I couldn't find anyone approachable to ask where it was, so I used the customer one, which apparently is a huge effing deal. Got a call the next day saying they weren't going to hire me for the position. Never paid me for that shift either. Can't say I was too upset after the way the staff treated me on the first day. Story 47. This was actually a couple months ago. I applied for a marketing executive role in an agency. Got a call a few days later. They asked me a few questions and told me they would contact me later. They email me saying they want to have an online interview. The day arrives, log into the platform, wait for 10 minutes, and nothing. 20. Nothing. I send an email asking if something is wrong, and she calls me saying that she'll be late to postpone 1 hour. First red flag. When we start the interview, she forgot who I was and asked me to resend her my CV because she lost it. Second and third red flag. Everything is going well. I'm answering the questions, but she clearly is very disorganized and her train of thought is just ridiculous. She goes from topic A to M back to B, then topic T. Just really weird. I could barely follow the conversation. Fourth red flag. By the end, she says she's very happy with me, but still has other people to interview and asks me if I have other interviews. I said I did because I in fact had other interviews planned. This all ends with her saying to email her a week later to know the answer because she might forget to let me know. Fifth red flag. Nonetheless, I emailed her because she hadn't said anything. She didn't reply, and I was just like, F this company. What a moron she is. Got a job 2 weeks later, so it was fine. My favorite part about her questions was when she was trying to be technical about the different platforms, but clearly didn't know what any of that was. That would have been a very easy job. Story 48. Interviewed at a job where they advised me some on-call work would be the norm, which I expected. What I didn't foresee is this. Interviewer. Well, just so you know, the way we handle weekend on-call is you'll need to check a BlackBerry about every 90 minutes to see if there's any tickets, and then you have 30 minutes to respond after that. You'd be on call about every 6 to 8 weeks. Me. Okay, just for clarity though, what about overnight? Does someone call the phone if a ticket comes in at 3:30 a.m.? No, we pretty much expect you to wake up every 90 minutes and check the email on the phone through the entire weekend. Me. Okay. Do you give the person on call the following Monday off then? That person's gonna be pretty sleep deprived after an entire weekend of that. No, you still work your normal hours. It's never been an issue. Me. Sorry, but that sounds extremely dangerous. You're asking someone to basically sleep almost zero for an entire weekend, and then you're going to put them on the road Monday morning? You're going to get an employee or other people killed. Well, like I said, it's never been an issue. Me. I think we're done here. I'm not going to put myself or others at risk for any job. Just Just because nothing has happened before does not mean it can't happen. I really think you need to reevaluate this policy because I can't tell you how crazy and dangerous this sounds. Okay, well, like I said again, it's never been a problem, but if it's not for you, that's fine. I left that interview completely dumbfounded and could not believe what I had heard. Still amazed, years and years later, they thought it was fine. Look, maybe this is just a me thing. There's not a job or a salary out there that I would take at the expense of having to wake up every 90 minutes to look at a BlackBerry and be on a call. That is absolutely insane. Story 49. I double majored in communications and creative writing in college, and at one point during my senior year, I was interested in parlaying that into copywriting or visual communication design for marketing/advertising firms. So I applied for entry-level positions at 2 different companies that seemed legit. Their websites and the job postings looked and sounded professional and exactly what I was looking for. With the first job, I got to the in-person interview stage and still saw no red flags. They were keeping up appearances well, asked me good questions about my writing and design skills, passed themselves off as a decent-sized ad/marketing agency in the large city nearby with some impressive clients. We discussed compensation and the salary range seemed nice, so the interview goes well. The hiring manager tells me he wants to do a final follow-up interview with me, and I should hear back about scheduling that within the next few days. I'm thinking, great, I might actually have a good job lined up before I graduate. A couple days later, he calls me. We schedule it, and he tells me that we'll be doing the interview at a Sam's Club in the area. I'm like, what? He gives me the address and then just hangs up. Immediately, part of me is thinking, what the F? But I figured naively that maybe this last interview was to walk me through them actually working on marketing/ad campaigns with their clients, and they're going to put me to the test before offering me the job. So I show up at the Sam's Club in an effing suit carrying a leather binder. I see the guy and he walks me around the store to a kiosk he has set up. Within a couple of minutes, it's explained to me that this company's entire business model is doing MLM crap where they go to various grocery, bulk, or department stores and pop up displays for their clients' scam products, offering people to pay up front to try out the product. And if you don't like, it's your money back, guaranteed. Then you just pocket their money, get the F out of Dodge, and ghost these people when they inevitably call up and want a refund because the nifty hairdryer they paid $50 for is a total piece of crap and broke within 2 days. On top of that, the job had no base salary and is 100% commission. I immediately walk out and ignore this guy's calls over the next week or so until he stops calling. With the second company, I also made it to the in-person interview stage, only this time, they weren't even trying to hide the fact that they were doing the exact same MLM scam bullcrap. Only other interview I've ever walked out of. Funny side note about that interview, before I walked out, I asked about benefits, and they mentioned that they didn't have medical insurance. I was disappointed to hear this, but wanting to be professional, I flippantly remarked that that was okay because I could stay on my parents' insurance till I was 26 thanks to Obamacare. Suddenly, this woman acts all shocked and offended at the idea of a 22-year-old postgrad being a dependent for insurance, even though her company wasn't even offering insurance as a benefit. She was stunned and kept saying things like, "Are you sure that's right? I'll have to look that up. That's crazy." Apparently, she was an alt-right nutjob, and the sheer mention of Obamacare sent her into a effing tizzy. After these 2 experiences, I completely wrote off working in marketing/advertising. Within 3 months of graduating, I got a legitimate job as a technical writer in the medical device industry, and I've spent my whole career doing that with no regrets. Story 50. I'm a private nanny. Minimum wage in my state is $12 an hour. This woman wanted me to watch her infant triplet boys, who were learning to crawl, 5 days a week, pick her 4-year-old up from school, do her laundry and the kids, cook meals for her entire family, some light cleaning, and wipe all their toys with disinfectant wipes every day. 12-hour days for $10 an hour. And when I tried to negotiate the rate a little by saying I could be a little flexible, her offer was less than half my rate. But not that flexible. She tried to argue that she has a cleaning lady that's doing it right now, plus her cleaning duties for $12. Lady, I don't care that you scammed some poor woman into basically providing slave labor for you. I'm not doing it. She was a referral from a longtime client of mine who I loved, but was moving states, and my client told her that she throws in gas money for me every check because she knows I drive over an hour to be there, and she didn't want to lose me. This lady then goes into a long spiel about how she wouldn't be able to convince her husband to give me gas money. Like, I'm not worried about gas money. I'm trying to make a legal wage. The best part is that she was flexing to my client a few weeks earlier that she has a night nanny that exclusively gets up with the kids while she sleeps and that she pays them $30 an hour. That's the only reason my client referred me to this lady. She thought I wasn't going to get stiffed because she wasn't cheap. She was cheap, living in a $500,000 house, stay-at-home mom, but wants to pay me less than minimum wage to do everything at her house for 12 hours while she does nothing? Story 51. Tough call, but I think it would have to be the interview where I had the hardest time staving off the giggles. It was an interview for a promotion within my organization. Rather than actually ask questions, the interviewer explained that she would do a series of role-playing exercises with me. The common thread through all of them was that she would play the role of a-hole making insane demands, and I would play the role of terrified new hire. What do you do? Problem was, she specified exactly who she was playing each time, by title and name. When she got to the third or fourth role play, it was obvious she wasn't interested in actually hiring anyone, but just screwing with people. And then she said, okay, new scenario. Let's say I'm this guy. He's the executive 4 levels above her. Funny thing was, I'd worked there longer than she had, and I'd met this guy quite a few times. He was actually a really nice and patient dude, whose most notable feature was his giant grin. He loved helping people, loved teaching, loved explaining the real-world meaning of his esoteric field in real-world terms. The interviewer had definitely never met him, because she then proceeded to roleplay being him exactly the same as the previous a-hole roles. Demeaning, snapping, yelling, "Why don't you know that? Why are you such a goddamn failure?" etc. I didn't laugh in her face, but I couldn't keep from smirking as I responded calmly in the face of this ridiculousness. She did not like that, neither did her observer in the corner, whose silently furious pace of note scribbling increased for that one. Needless to say, I did not get the job. No great loss, though. That interviewer's position, in the entire team she was trying to create, didn't last more than a few months past that point. Alternatively, as an interviewer, also stiff competition, but I'd go for the one where the candidate showed up a half hour late, gave no explanation or excuse when prompted, acted bored through the questions and totally blew half of them, and closed by saying she wanted us to understand she wasn't interested in a starting salary of anything less than $150,000. It was for an entry-level job. The other candidates waiting out in the hall were folks about to graduate from college. The salary range, which had been explicitly stated previously, was generous, but sure as F not that generous. Story 52. I had a job interview one time. It was scheduled for 2:30 p.m. We had corresponded via email. I showed up at 2:15 and took a seat in their waiting area. About 5 minutes later, a guy rounded the corner and said, "Who are you?" I introduced myself, and he said, "Oh, you were the one supposed to be here at 2?" I knew it was 2:30, but in that moment I was freaked out and said, "I was sure it was 2:30. I apologize," etc., etc. He took me to a conference room and started asking me questions in a pretty aggressive way, and then told me to fill out this weird comprehension test they had. As I was filling it out, he sat across the table from me, and halfway through the test he goes, "I did say 2:30, huh?" He was looking at the email at the phone. Then he berated me for not correcting him. You really should have said something. I don't know why you let me get away with that. By the way, this was essentially a temp job at an accounting firm. He invited me back for a second round after all that, and I declined. Side note to the story. The weird comprehension test they had me fill out, question 3 just said, a triangle has 3 sides. No question, no punctuation, or a place to answer even. If anyone has ever taken that test or knows what the hell that means, I'd be fascinated, as it's driven me crazy for a few years now. The guy said it was from some outside company, so I don't think he knew the answer. Story 53. About 5 to 6 years ago, I was unemployed and feeling pretty low in confidence. I found an ad for a job in marketing that seemed promising and seemed like I was qualified for. I applied and got an interview, which I was super happy about. At the interview, I met with a man who was middle management. He vaguely talked about the job being first-person marketing and so on. I wasn't familiar with the term, but I was also inexperienced, so I figured it was legitimate. The office was a legitimate office after all. I was on top of my game and truly aced that interview. He quickly told me that I was a very strong candidate, and if I had time, I could spend the day with their best employee, who would do the second part of the interview. I agreed. Well, I was told that we would go out to the field to experience a day in the job. We went to a strip mall where it turns out we were selling makeup door to door. My stomach dropped. I was trapped with this guy since he had driven us and feeling like a fool. He offered to buy me breakfast, which I agreed to, thinking at least I'll get a bagel out of it. During breakfast, he proceeded to do his interview. Most of his questions seemed to revolve around my personal life. One of the questions was literally, "Do you have a boyfriend or anything else that would distract you from the job?" I answered by saying, "Why would me having a boyfriend be relevant to this position?" I wanted to cry. He took me back to the office, where I tried to leave right away. Then the middle manager asked me if I'd be willing to meet with the boss. I said no, but somehow they convinced me. I went into the boss's office, and she was this young woman who said something to the effect of, "I know you must be skeptical, but hear me out. You'll make $300 a week, guaranteed, and to prove it, we'll pay you $300 your first week, whether you sell anything or not. That's how confident we are in our system." I politely told her to F off and left immediately. When I got home, I broke down. I felt so foolish for falling for a big MLM ad. My confidence took some time to be built back up. Story 54. I had an interview with a logistics company right after everything got bad with COVID in my state. I asked if we could possibly do a Zoom call, but they insisted I come into the office. I show up 10 minutes before my interview. The receptionist looks confused as to why I'm there, as all but 3 people are working from home. I say, "I have an interview with X at 2 p.m. She asks me to take a seat, and I wait, and I wait. 30 minutes go by, and I get up to ask reception if maybe X is running late. She says that she will try calling his cell. Another 20 minutes go by. He walks in, and the receptionist says that his 2 p.m. interview is waiting. He looks confused and says, "Okay, you can follow me over here." No introduction, no attempt at a handshake, nothing. He begins by giving me an overview of the company history. Definitely something he's rehearsed a few times in the mirror. Doesn't ask me any questions, doesn't even ask me my name. Then he goes on to say how I don't need any experience in freight or logistics to be successful, yada yada. Basically insinuating I had no experience. After the 3rd time of him mentioning not being well versed in the field, I spoke for the first time. If I didn't have any experience doing Z and managing Z, I wouldn't be here. He looks a bit stunned. I've had it by this point, and I came to interview as another option anyway. The company was certainly not my first choice to begin with, so I thought I would just see this through to see how absurd it would be if it continued. So he continues explaining the role of their customer service team, and what skills make for a great team player, etc. I say, okay, great. How well do they interact with the department I'm applying for? He says that I wouldn't work much with that department. I said, well, I would hope so, as they would be my team. He again looks stunned. I take this opportunity at his silence to jump in and tell him exactly what I'm applying for. My experience, my education, everything that applies. I do not let him speak. I grab my resume back from the middle of the table. I stand up and say, if I could offer some advice, next time you're interviewing anyone, treat them with the respect they deserve. I turn to leave, and he begins to say something. I turn back and say, what is my name? He gaped like a fish out of water. Please do not contact me. I'm no longer interested. And I walked out. So satisfying. Story 55. Locked in an interview with a company that looked great for what I thought was a very forward-thinking position. Got suited up, showed up 10 minutes early, checked in. First red flag is they gave me the wrong office. No big. Got to the right one, said, hi, I'm here for the 12 o'clock appointment. They said, cool, whatever, just go wait over there. 15 minutes later, a woman came out and brought me back to a big conference room with about 15 other people in it. I thought, wow, these folks are serious. This is going to be great. Glad I researched the company and am fully prepared, etc. We all sit chatting for a few minutes as it's clear we're waiting for someone to join us and start the meeting. In talking to the people around me, I realize they're not here to meet with me. They're all here to interview as well. This is not what I thought I was walking into at all, but let's roll with it, I guess. When the guy who was running things walked in and started the meeting, it took about a minute to realize this was not only a group interview, but it was for an entirely different company with the exact same name that had every mark of a pyramid scheme, including misrepresenting what was actually happening from square one. I went along with it for momentum reasons for about 10 minutes, then got up in the middle of the pitch and gave them back all the materials they'd passed out and let them know I thought I was here to meet one-on-one with the other company with the same name and not this pyramid scheme group pitch bullcrap. I really needed a job at that time and felt stupid for putting on a suit, getting excited, and driving 45 minutes to what I thought was going to be a game changer for me and all that. So I was pretty pissed off. Sad drive home that day. Story 56. I went to an interview right out of college. Economy was still pretty bad at the time, and the job was for management selling a brand of fiber-based internet. Cough, cough. Pay wasn't great, but they promised opportunity galore. Office was in one of those buildings where you rent by the suite. Every well inside was bright neon colored, and the receptionist had me sit down and wait. Guy brought me back. He was a midget. Whatever, I figured. Neat even. We interview. He keeps skirting all my questions about pay, location, benefits, etc. F. He wouldn't even tell me what they actually did. The goddamn ad was so vague. I just figured we were installing the crap because it sounded like that. He asked me if I understood everything he just blathered out in 80s corporate speak, and I blatantly asked him, "What do you even do here? Because you've been dodging me this whole time." Because I was beyond done. It was literally in the AM. I was seething about the long drive. I was done. He keeps repeating, growing ever more indignant and testy, grinding his teeth and leaning over the desk. We meet people. We play with their dogs. We make friends. That's what we do. Like a cult. Finally, I deduced that this isn't a management slot. It's a promise that you may one day be management. And I was to be selling the crap as a contractor door to door. That goose was thoroughly cooked. He asked me if I wanted to continue, and I flatly said no. He made a show of tearing up my resume and pitching it in the garbage like some jackass bro power move. Pathetic, and I can top that. I stood up. I said, "Tell Frodo I said hi." He lost his crap and almost jumped on me before restraining himself, and I left. I've been in that building since, and they're not there. No traces. Can't find any history anywhere. Records, internet history, nada. I'm 90% sure it was a scam or a literal cult, and I dodged that cannonball like Neo. Story 57. I go to a company to have an interview with the IT manager. I get walked back to IT, and this guy is buried in wires in the server room. Looks like he's surprised I'm there. The HR person looks like she's very embarrassed. The guy says, "Follow me." We walk down a long hall and out a side door, get into a station wagon and start driving. He starts asking me a bunch of IT questions. No joke, I had just read a magazine article the night before. Yes, a while ago, and I had remembered something that said, ODBC is a bloated driver. I had no friggin' idea at the time what ODBC was. The IT manager says, "What do you think about ODBC?" Without thinking, I just spout out, "It's a bloated driver." His jaw drops while we're driving. He looks at me, nodding his head up and down, smiling, and says, "That's right." We park at the large grocery store, get out. I'm staying on his heels because I don't know any better. We walk into the store. He goes to a counter by the checkout lines and buys a few packs of cigarettes. We start walking back to his car. Remember, I'm at an interview, so I'm in a three-piece suit with jacket on. He lights one up and we drive the 5 minutes back to the office, not saying anything. We get back to the building and he says, "It was a good interview. You're hired. Come in tomorrow." I was like, okay. Backstory follows if you want to know some interesting stuff. Guy was greatly feared in the company for being mean to everyone. He treated me like crap, but I had just spent a decade in the military being treated like crap, so it just rolled off me. Took his crap like it was nothing, blew his mind. People were always asking me if I was okay working for him. People would look down or away when they would walk by us in the halls. This guy was a total jerk, but damn, he was a friggin' genius. The things he had done were amazing and way ahead of anything I was aware of. My knowledge quadrupled in 3 months working for him. I could spout the difference between Ethernet protocols, tell you the packets used in different types of data transmissions, and so on. The guy was actually rich because he wrote a program when he was a teenager that controlled surface motion on aircraft. Crazy smart. Only reason he was there was to be close to his kids from a divorce. One day, one of the netware servers, yes, a while ago, volumes wrapped around on itself and he was working to get the storage back online. This is netware 3.1 on HP servers. The issue was HP at the time considered 1 MB to be 1000K, whereas netware considered 1 MB to be 1024K like the rest of the world. He's trying to calculate the exact amount of storage he needs, and I'm not joking, he's sitting out back in a smoke area of the company at a table with an engineering book calculating by hand to the 9th decimal place how to size the volume. That's 0.000000000. All this while the assembly lines are offline for hours and massive amounts of people are standing around because they cannot scan the barcodes for their assemblies to be built because the manufacturing databases are offline due to being on the wrapped volumes. I walk up to him and say, "Why don't we just shave 24 bits off each 1000 bits to get the volume back online and call it a day?" He yelled at me at the top of his lungs in front of a bunch of people on smoke break, "That's not how we do things here!" We're there until about 2 a.m. in the morning by the time we get the volume back online. The next morning, the president of the company calls him in his office and fires him on the spot. They put me in charge and I'm crapping bricks. I basically started a multi-month process to migrate to Windows servers. Windows 2000 just came out, yeah, a long time ago, and start implementing Active Directory from scratch while pulling over the NDS environment. Novel's Active Directory. Long story shorter, sorry, I survived, learned a ton, got yelled at a lot, and it all kick-started an IT career that I'm still in, but I will never forget that guy. The craziest thing is that guy called me up at home 2 weeks after he was fired and said, "You were the best person I ever worked with. I hired you because you knew Microsoft was crap in your interview, calling ODBC bloated." He would have hated me knowing I was replacing everything he did with Windows. I'll never forget that interview or that guy. Thank goodness I've never become him. But he was the only genius I've ever worked with. Story 58. It was a job with a delivery company, but as an office worker. I would make the routes and be the person's driver called if they were having any issues finding the location. Pay wasn't great, but it was full-time with benefits, so I applied and went to an interview. Interview with HR was great. She was impressed by my knowledge of the area and my ability to troubleshoot. She then says she wants to give me the job, but cannot because the owner needs to approve the hire. Okay, annoying, but I'll play along. Schedule another interview for a week later. When I arrived, there's no one in the main area, so I sit in a waiting area. All the doors to different offices were closed. I figured the receptionist was maybe in the washroom or something. No one came. I waited for 20 minutes past my interview time. Would have left, but I needed a job. The owner finally comes into the waiting area and leads me back to his office. No apology or acknowledgement that I had to wait. He is immediately rude. Goes over my resume piece by piece, criticizing every place I've ever worked. I had just graduated university, but jobs in my actual field were extremely difficult to find at the time. Most of my jobs were part-time and in retail. I also worked as a summer camp counselor, which he said was a useless job. Very few questions about my ability to do the job. I was so angry, but kept my cool. I tried connecting my previous job experience to this job. Unsurprised that I was never contacted again. I had noticed that everyone I had met in the office was the same race, but figured it was a coincidence. I later learned 80% of the people working there are related to the owner, and everyone else is the same race as the owner. Apparently, this has happened a few times. HR lady says you got the job, just interview with the owner to confirm. Then, owner sees you're not the same race and finds reasons not to hire you. Very annoying. Story 59. They had a swarm of beetles on the outside of the building. It was interesting, but not really a red flag until I went inside. Sitting in the conference room, the beetles started falling down through the ceiling, bouncing off my nose, landing in my hair, and going down my shirt to be trapped in my bra, where they started biting my cleavage. As I'm frozen in horror because I've heard wonderful things about this company, it's a super short commute, and I thought I really wanted this job. The lead interviewer keeps peering out as he'd heard there were bugs, but he just can't see any. He wasn't interested in relocating to another room. He put on reading glasses briefly to look at one I pointed out. They lightly mocked me for being easily creeped out. I endured a rain of biting beetles to meet with 12 different interviewers. I keep bees. I'm not easily disconcerted by bugs, but having them in my bra did make me twitchy as hell. I did not get the job. They said they worried I seemed uncomfortable in their work environment. Story 60. I wanted to add, I had another interview where the boss did the sell me this pen crap, and then went on about how the office has an Xbox and they win prizes all the time. If that's the case, it's a crap sales job. Normal jobs don't have those incentives because they don't need them. Another one. Interview went well until right at the end. I was told I'd be earning commission only, trying to make appointments for double glazing salesmen by knocking door to door for 8 hours a day. Best quote from that is, "Look, I know you don't want commission only, but come and try it out for 2 days and I'll pay you 30 euros a day." I had another interview where I was told straight up, "We don't like whiny behavior in this office. We don't go around talking behind people's backs. It's all very open." Got the job. It was an office of about 7 people. The whole 6 weeks I worked there, everyone stopped talking when I walked into the room, and people didn't speak to me because they were all talking about me behind my back. Bear in mind, I was about 28 and they were all in their 50s. Eventually, there was a mutual decision for me to leave the business, and I was told, "There's a black cloud over you. You bring an atmosphere to the office." I didn't do anything to cause that. It was like immediately people had an attitude with me, especially the one young person there. He hated sharing his status as the young guy and made it quite clear he didn't care for me being there straight away. Effing bunch of idiots. Story 61. We were asked to report at 8 a.m. for an interview at a stem cell bank company for the position of junior lab manager. The location was over 2 hours away from where I lived, so I left at around 5 a.m. from home, too early for breakfast. At the entrance of the company, they took us to put our belongings, phone, and footwear in a locker. Standard protocol in my home country, especially if it's a bio-based lab. Once we were all inside, we were asked to wait in an air-conditioned room. We were kept waiting until 12 noon, when I went up to the reception area and asked what time the interview will begin. They said HR managers are yet to arrive, please wait. Back then, 12 plus years ago, I was a fresh graduate, around 22 years old, and badly in need of a job, so I did not say anything and went back to my waiting spot. By this time, I was very hungry, having not eaten anything since morning. I had some chocolate and snacks in my bag, which was stuck in the locker. Around 1 p.m., they said those who want to go out for lunch can go and come back in 30 minutes, but HR can come any time and start the interview, and if the candidate was not found when their name was called, they would be automatically disqualified. Naturally, only some people went out for food. Rest, like me, fearful of being disqualified, kept waiting and hoping someone would call. Remember, we were hungry and sitting bare feet in an AC room. Only water was provided to us, and by 2 to 3 p.m., that was also consumed by all of us waiting. After 3 p.m., some candidates started leaving. They were annoyed, /hungry, had other places to be at. From around 40 to 50 of us, we were down around 25 by 5 p.m. Around 5:30 p.m., the HR comes and calls a candidate inside, and that interview goes on until 6:30 p.m., which irritated me finally. I knew it will take me 2 hours to go back home, and as a woman, it was not safe for me to travel in the dark in my home country, so I decided to leave, of course, angry and dejected at an entire day being wasted. Through the course of the day's waiting, I managed to make a friend who stayed on and was called in for the second interview, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Later, when I asked her how the interview went, she told me they asked her how stressed she was feeling as the first question as soon as she entered the room. She said she was feeling okay. She has a calm personality in general. They told her they had made everyone wait intentionally the entire day, since the job was in a highly stressful environment. What stress, I have no idea. They finally ended up doing some aptitude questions with her and general stuff about where she lives, can she commute to this workplace, etc., and by 7:30 p.m. offered her the job, without interviewing the others still waiting outside. And they said, we'll tell them interviews have been canceled for today and they can come back tomorrow. And when they come tomorrow, we'll tell them person has been selected already and send them back, if she accepted the job offer. She was older than me and had worked in the US before this experience, so she turned the job offer down and told them it's simply unacceptable they treated everyone during the day, and she would not be associated with this company in any way. She's still my friend and already a top-level management executive now at a very big pharma company. The stem cell company went bankrupt after 4 to 5 years of this incident, and I reached home safe that night, with no regrets of having walked out. To this day, I cannot still believe that they actually made people wait with no care about their time, food, or dignity. Freshers may be desperate for jobs, but they're also human, and no HR has a right to behave this way, ever. It's just not excusable. Story 62. I applied for an IT-related job at a video production company. I've never done IT professionally, but I've always tinkered with computers and worked in video production for years, so I figured I could pick up the knowledge along the way. I'm a fast learner. I had the requirements they were after, except knowledge of a command line language that they used. I figured if I got the job, I could learn it. So I did the online application, got down to 45 for a phone interview, did the phone interview, got down to 10 for a video interview. This is where it got tricky. I got into the video interview. There were 3 people. Everything was going pretty well. They were asking me behavior and personality type questions. Then one of the other interviewers took over and he starts asking me straight technical questions. What does this button do in the command line? What does this command achieve? I keep saying, I don't know, sorry, pass. Then he says, have you ever used this command line? No. I think I'm done. Does anyone else have any questions? I kind of died inside a little. He was very clearly disappointed and shocked, and I felt like a fool. Surprisingly, the interviewer sent me learning resources about the subject, and I got asked to an interview with him 3 more times over the next year. But I turned them down as I found a job I'm quite happy with. Story 63. It was last summer when it was unclear whether unemployment benefits were going to continue, and I really wanted to go back to work. However, my old job let me go after being closed for months, and options to go back into my field, hospitality, were slim. I was willing to take almost anything as long as it was a consistent paycheck. I interviewed at a gas station and had zero clue it was a sales position since it was never said during the phone screening, so it became instantly awkward when at the beginning I noted I wasn't interested in sales at all. It got worse after he looked at my resume, saw all my experience, and continued for the rest of the interview to repeat, "You don't belong here. You'd be better off where you came from," but still pushed on to interview me for a sales position. By the end, my self-esteem was crushed, and I almost cried on the way home, wishing I could go back to where I came from. A few weeks later, a recruiter for that same company kept calling to set up an interview, since they clearly didn't know it already happened. After the third call, I answered and let them know I'll never work for them a day in my life after recounting my experience. They apologized and never heard from them since. Story 64. During my career as a paralegal, my most memorable job interview was with a male attorney who personally conducted the interview himself. I should mention that I'm also a male and that during the time period in question, there were not many male paralegals around, particularly in the city that I lived in at the time, deep south of the United States. When the attorney ushered me in for the interview, I quickly noticed how odd he was acting when he first saw me in the waiting room. He was acting very suspicious of me, and after a few preliminary questions, he asked me how I heard about the job opening. From an advisement in a legal newspaper was my answer. And the next question out of his mouth was, "So, my wife did not call you personally to ask you to interview?" To which I replied, "No." Long story short, I didn't get the job, but it dawned on me much later that he must have been having an affair, or at least his wife may have thought he was. In my profession, it was quite common for attorneys to have affairs with their attractive legal assistants. Seriously, I've never felt such vibes of suspicion coming from a person whom I'd never met before and who seemed convinced that I was some sort of plant, sent there by his equally suspicious wife in lieu of a hot young female legal secretary. Story 65. Well, I was over the job I had, and so called a friend who was president of a new company and looking for sales/marketing people. We were going to eat lunch in a little soup and sandwich place downstairs, then head up to the offices to meet more of the staff. A couple of other guys were going to meet us for lunch, but we were to come down as they finished their morning calls. 3 of us, my friend, the VP, and I, grabbed a table and started eating. I had ordered a Starbucks bottled mocha drink with my food, the kind where the chocolate always settles to the bottom and needs vigorous shaking. I was a bit nervous, of course, but things were going well. So I was talking away and, without paying attention, I grabbed my drink and shook it hard. Only I had already taken the top off. I launched an entire bottle of Starbucks mocha into the air. It was like slow motion, and we all watched as the contents of the bottle cascaded down all over the table, all over me, and all over the vice president's lap. It was everywhere but in the bottle. The VP gasped and jumped up, dripping, and ran over to the counter for more napkins, and we all started cleaning up as best we could, which wasn't very well. About that time, 2 more sales guys came down, and stopped short when they saw the mess. Instinctively, they looked at my friend, their boss, and he simply shook his head. They sat down for the interview, and I quietly explained my foolishness. And then everyone just tried to act like I wasn't drenched in Starbucks mocha. It was awkward. I had to go upstairs and meet the staff that way as well, then walk back to my car in a nearby parking garage. I honestly looked like someone had thrown mocha latte-filled balloons at me. It was dreadful and embarrassing beyond words, but I got the job, and we've laughed about it to this day. Story 66. My dream job opened up at a school across the street from my house a month after I'd moved in. Serendipitously, the year before, I'd met and befriended the outgoing teacher at a conference in Seattle. She lived in the Detroit area, and I was about to move there. We teach a specialized elective, and her program identically matched the one I'd spent 14 years building at my previous school in another state. It was a hell of a coincidence, and colleagues within our professional organization assumed I was a shoo-in for the position. When I arrived at the interview, they informed me that I'd be teaching another subject in addition to the one I'd applied for. I never taught the other subject, and that was clear in my resume, which I mentioned right away. Regardless, most of the questions they asked me were about the subject I'd never taught. They said, "Just try the best you can." I went home and cried. They ended up splitting the position between 2 already there teachers who didn't want it. They proceeded to run the program into the ground within a year. Then they quit a year later. I'm still unemployed. Story 67. I interviewed for a sales management job at a luxury auto dealer after leaving a really toxic nonprofit, and to make matters worse, I had unverified concerns that my reputation was sort of tarnished following my departure. I get to the dealership, and the 2 interviewers are my potential direct supervisor and the head of the store. They printed off a predictive analysis report that was a summary of traits and flaws based off of keywords in my resume. Bizarre practice. Anyway, they gave me little to no information, interrogated me, and then walked me out before ghosting me for good. I don't have a single problem admitting that experience sticks with me and compels me to wish misfortune on them. I later got a job in real estate with someone that had worked at that dealership, and the predictive report nonsense was something they had never explained, nor has any of his peers who also worked there. Despite this, the interviewers claim to have utilized this practice since the store's inception. As paranoid as it makes me sound, this experience and that last tidbit, along with other mishaps in the course of my job hunt, only served to reinforce my suspicions of some professional conspiracy against me. Happy ending is that I finally landed my dream job in the justice system, as I had long been aspiring towards, with the best boss I've ever had and ever will have, and have a shot at leadership as indicated by my peers, supervisors, and a lovely HR officer. Life turned around, and the cherry on top is my soulmate, who's brought me 3 perfect and beautiful little soulmates who call me dad. Story 68. Typical IT story. Long time ago, I worked as an IT consultant. Typically, we would just be told to show up at Company X and do our job, whether it be installing new computers or servers, running network cables, so on and so on. One day I get called into HQ and my handler says to me, "Tyzod, we need you to go to Company Y and interview with them before we can send you on the gig." He goes on to say, "We've been sending people in and they've been rejecting them all, and we think you'd be good because you're very good with people." So I agree, go home and refresh my resume and head over to meet with Company Y. Mind you, for a temp IT gig. I go in and meet with the hiring manager. She's this older, heavy-set white lady, and I can tell right away that she's in a bad mood. Or maybe this was just the way she was. We start talking and she's reading through my resume. Things seem to be going well until all of a sudden she slams my resume down on the table and says loudly, "God damn it, I told them I needed someone with SQL." She says it out as sequel, experience. I do have experience building out and deploying SQL servers, I say. "Well, then why is it not in your resume?" she barks back. "It does, under my skills. See, right there," pointing to the line on my resume that says Microsoft SQL. "This does not say SQL," she responds back. "SQL is the same thing as, this is a waste of my time," she yells. I'm keeping my cool and continue to try to explain to her, but her mind is made up and she ends up just walking out of the interview room. I sit there for a few minutes, then get up and see myself out. I head back to HQ, explain what happened word for word. They ended up dropping Company Y from their client list. Story 69. Too many to list, but all for different reasons. Most ridiculous offer? I interviewed at a 5-year-old startup company who was lowballing salary big time. Interviewer kept advertising the huge bonus potential. Keep in mind, I was not interviewing for a sales position. "If we hit our sales goal this year, you'll make 8 times salary." Me. "What is sales goal?" Them. 15 million. Me. "What are current sales?" This was 3.5 months into the year. Them. 60K. I literally laughed and said, "There's no way that's happening." Interviewer did not disagree. Most ridiculous interview. Walked in for first interview and they handed me a 10-page packet. Solve all of these coding challenges by hand on this paper. Code needs to compile / be syntactically correct, etc., etc. Handed it back and left. Note, they were not trivial questions. Biggest letdown. Interviewed for a hacker position for an electric vehicle company. As I'm not local, we discussed early on if it would be a remote position and they agree. Had a couple phone interviews which were tough, but did well. Flew out to their office and spent a full day getting grilled by multiple people. Hard, but went well and had some great conversations. Got a call back from the recruiter and they said, "Congrats, you got the position. But we were thinking about it and we'd really like someone on site. Would you consider relocation?" Would have loved to relo, but couldn't and had to turn it down. Biggest runaround. Interviewed with an up-and-coming software automation company. Had multiple phone screens, did a bunch of silly online mental tests, had more phone screens, met some people in person, flew to New York to meet / interview with even more people, heard nothing for weeks, sent a polite email asking for an update. Heard nothing. Then got a note that, "Sorry for the delay, but we had a delay, but we're definitely looking to hire you." Then nothing. Then more nothing. Sent another nice note. Then nothing. Then nothing. Then another note asking if I was still interested. I chose not to reply. Note, this dragged out over the span of like 7 months. The logic games were silly, and literally every interview / discussion had yet another one. It was really strange.